ladies and gentlemen, it's finger on the pulse time because last month the enormous DLC for Elden Ring arrived.
Oh, shit. I've completely forgot.
Yeah.
Forgot it was even coming.
Shadow of the Erdtree, and as expected, it was unbearably good. I'm talking in the past tense, of course, because I've completed it. Not quite 100%, because there's still a few key items and stuff I haven't found, but I beat all the dungeons, all the bosses, all the optional stuff, and it is every bit as good as the full game that laid the foundation for it. It sees some wonderful expansions on the gameplay mechanics. A lot of reviews said that the only downside of Shadow of the Erdtree expansion is that it didn't provide anything radically new to the original Elden Ring experience, and I feel stupid to state that, because if you're hoping for a radically different game, you need to wait for another game, not more of the same game, which is what you rightfully should expect in DLC. It's also not entirely fair, because the game does introduce a huge amount of new mechanics, some of which I never dabbled with because they came in the form of new weapon types and new abilities, and if you're so inclined to play around with those and experiment with some different character builds, then you're going to have a lot of new and exciting gameplay elements to have a go with. I'm not that way inclined, really. I'm very much when I find a build that works for me, I double down on it. So I was still using my main game build and the weapon that I had in that for the majority of the DLC playthrough. But then I did find a new weapon type, which is the Great Katana, which is a heavier version of the standard katanas that sort of split the difference between power and speed. And a specific Great Katana that I found in the sort of mid to late game became my main weapon, and I just had a great time with that. But there are now 7 other different new weapon types in the game. You've got things like thrusting shields, reverse hand swords, and light great swords, which are kind of slight tweaks on existing weapons.
Yeah.
Then you've also got totally new concepts for a From Software game, like hand-to-hand combat or beast claws, and essentially like permanent item-based weapons, like throwing blades and perfume bottles that were like a crafted, consumable, throwable item. You now get them as like infinitely consumable, full-powered weapons.
Yeah.
And the new enemies in the DLC, and obviously the boss fights, do require you to get your head around how to use some of the new mechanics. Especially, well, one of the things you craft a lot of in the game are essentially different types of bombs, but they're crafted inside jars, so they're jars. And there's a new sort of top-tier powered version of those called hefty jars, and you need to be able to sort of craft those and utilise those. What?
I just find hefty jars a really funny phrase.
It is quite funny. It is quite funny.
Craft and chuck your hefty jars.
Yeah, and you must do that to bring down a series of specific mini-bosses sort of scattered across the land. Well, let's talk about this new land that you're in Shadow of the Erdtree. It is a brand new area of the map in a totally different sort of realm to the main game. It's got so much flavour of its own that it doesn't feel like more of the same of anything that you've seen before in the lands between. It's obviously huge, but it's also deceptively so, because there's actually a lot more verticality in the world design. With so many planes of topography sort of existing on top of and underneath each other, it's a really winding, tangled, organic configuration that means you've got even more variety than it would initially appear from just like a bird's eye view of the map. And I was really struck in this playthrough of the game just how good this game looks. And it had been a while since I played the PS5 version, because after, I blasted through that it was 120 hours, but over the course of 2 days. No, not quite. But then I did a whole playthrough on Steam Deck, and I haven't really, returned to it. And I haven't sort of seen the game since it's been patched, and there's been a whole load of graphical updates that are specific for like the PS5. And like the aesthetic design of the main game was extraordinary, even on the Steam Deck. And I think I take it for granted a little bit, because From Software have always set the bar so high in that regard. But graphically, it seems like the game has taken a big step up from when I first played it. And whether that is through like patches to the core game or just a step up in technical proficiency in the DLC. But some of the vistas, combined with the weather effects, made for some just jaw-dropping environmental spectacles. There's one place I arrived in. It's all covered in like surface water, and there was a giant ruined cathedral in there, and the whole area was surrounded by these really tall cliffs. And when I arrived, it was a really misty night, and I was just galloping around exploring until the dawn started to rise, and just the stark brightness of the sunlight that appeared over these cliffs just cut straight through this mist, and it was so striking. I just had to stop and watch in awe as the daylight then just spread across this whole area. It was just amazing.
Wow.
And in true testament to like the organic weather and environmental systems in this game, I tried to show it to a mate of mine, and I went back there and tried to replicate the experience, and the mist wasn't there. The light that was cast was very different. It meant that like I really treasured those like precious moments of environmental design because they felt special and, you know, unique. Some of the new areas in Shadow of the Erdtree are real standouts, especially there's an area called the Abyssal Woods, which I think is the most horror-like the FromSoft games have ever got, even considering Bloodborne, which was very horror-like in its design, and it was a bit scary at times, but this is the most tense and scared I've been in one of their games, not only because of the atmosphere created in the design of this area, with like moody swamps and oppressive cliffs and these tangled dead trees like skeletal fingers threatening to snatch you up. But the enemies in this mire are all afflicted with madness, which is a great start. And their attacks can then pass the madness on to you. And once your madness bar fills up, you absolutely die. And that's not anything too new in these games. But if you know how to approach and handle the enemies, it doesn't cause too much of a problem. However, there's a new type of enemy. And speaking of Bloodborne, it is actually reminiscent of a particular enemy from that game. And they are terrifying. If they catch a whiff of you, they charge straight for you. And if they catch you, which they will, it is a one-hit kill. And you have to just creep slowly through like long grass, tiptoe through the swamps, like in darkness and in heavy mist. You have to avoid anything that may make a sound. It is so horribly tense. And FromSoft have created such a brilliant like mini horror game within this game for just this one area. Usually, even if it's like a very dangerous area with like really hard enemies, I'll still want to go back and explore it a bit. I was so happy to be done with this area and never return. It's brilliant stuff. It's absolutely brilliant. One of the other things that reviews were saying about Shadow of the Erdtree, and has also invited a lot of unsubstantiated discourse from the wider gaming community, is the difficulty level in the DLC. Obviously. It's so ridiculously ignorant because there is nothing unfair about the difficulty in this game. And it's not even me saying, oh, you've just got to get good, you fucking noobs, grow up. This is what a real game is. You're not a real gamer, you twat. True, the game is hard. The bosses still require the same amount of discipline to learn their attack types, playing with a few different offensive strategies, maybe altering your build to work specifically against a particular boss. But it's absolutely no way substantially harder than the main game. It's certainly not substantially harder than some of the previous FromSoft DLC, which was really, really brutal. And none of that is still not as hard as Sekiro. And like I know that I mastered that game in particular, but I absolutely would not consider myself to be a particularly gifted gamer. Like I will happily stock up on tips and tricks and exploits to make things easier. You can't summon co-ops in Sekiro, but in Elden Ring and Dark Souls, I've always really enjoyed that aspect of the game. Not just because it makes boss fights a bit more, you know, straightforward sometimes, but because it's part of the community aspect that I really love about these games. And it's an opportunity to observe how other people are playing the game, get some ideas to try out new things yourself. In fact, like this main great katana weapon that I ended up using for the latter half of the game, I first saw in a summon, a co-op summon, and I was like then really keeping an eye out for when I would find that weapon, and I was really, really excited then when I did get it. And the game still caters with like a difficulty offset for when you do summon co-op players to help out. Like the boss's health bars go up significantly, so it's not always a help. If you summon someone and they die straight away, you are left fighting a boss with double health on your own, and then you're absolutely fucked. There was one boss in particular that I was sure I needed a hand with, mostly because the collectible figurine that came in the collector's edition was of this boss. Hang on. There
it is.
And the collectible figurine of a boss from the main game is the hardest boss in that game. So when I saw this boss in the game, I was like, I'm just gonna summon some co-ops. And I successfully summoned the incredible Let Me Solo Him player who made a name for themselves beating the hardest boss in the main game, Melania, totally on his own. And I was so thrilled that I finally had a chance to see him in action firsthand. I was absolutely, not just because I wouldn't have to worry about the boss, but it was just like, this is amazing. It's like meeting a celebrity, you know. He died within seconds against this one boss.
Oh, wow.
Still in his practicing stage. It must have been, because it was like, you know, the second day the game had come out. I ended up not using a co-op at all for the fight in the end, because like the precision required to beat it was so much more easy to execute without having too much else going on in the fight.
Yeah.
But the other thing about the difficulty in the game is that From Software have actually balanced the DLC incredibly well to cater for the fact that you could start playing the DLC when you're level 50, or you could start it when you were level 200. And of course, they don't want the players who have grinded for years to maximise all of their stats to just be able to waltz through the new content. So whilst the difficulty of the enemies and bosses and areas, that doesn't like scale with your level, your experience level does, because the DLC has all new items to help power you up. So you can still level up in the usual way to increase your base stats, but then you also find an amount of a specific item, which then increases your overall attack and defense, sort of exponentially, because it times by a percentage your base stat rather than just adds to them.
Yeah.
So players who think they're over-leveled from the main game will have a nasty shock thinking they can just blast through the new stuff, even if they then return and do some grinding to level up another 50 times. That's not how it works. It's a brilliant design decision because it levels the playing field beautifully without breaking anything. And I found, like, within starting the game, I found this wandering, like, aggressive NPC right near the start. He flattened me a dozen times just before I like gave up and went elsewhere. And then after I'd leveled up my Erdtree blessings a few times, that's the item, I returned and made mincemeat of him. And this is exactly how you have to approach all FromSoft games, which is if you can't overcome an enemy, either you need to practice or go somewhere else for a bit to level up. And it's brilliant that they've managed to retain this balance and this element of the game in the DLC, given the immense multitude of variances that the community will be approaching the DLC from.
Yeah.
It's absolutely extraordinary. There were some bosses that were, I mean, insanely hard. And I beat the final boss with the help of a co-op summon who attempted to do it on his own. It wasn't the actual Let Me Solo Him. And he had voice chat on, and he just spoke to me through the controller, because that's where it comes out of.
Yeah.
He said, "Right, I'm serious, man. Like, don't you dare come near me. Just stay back. I mean it. Stay back. And unless, of course, I'm dying, and then come in. But just stay back. Just let me do this. I can do this." We went in, and he said, just you need to look out for this one attack. When he jumps up and it goes this color, then you just need to run as far away as you can, because it will kill you. So you just need to run and dodge that, because if I died, obviously the fight would end and he'd be more angry, apparently. And then I stayed out of his way. He was taking the boss down. He was doing very well. And then this big attack happened. And I consumed a potion that would automatically save me from like a killing blow, and I didn't dodge the attack because it was huge, and I just but the potion, the ability that I had, saved me, and it killed him. And then I just heard him as his avatar was fading, just through the controller, going, "Fuck! I'm so shit at this game. Fuck! I'm so sorry, man. I am so sorry. And then gone. It's gone. I saved a replay of the fight, and I was desperately hoping that somehow it had saved like the voice chat, so I could keep that, but it hadn't, unfortunately.
Oh.
So you have to make do with the anecdote. So I had to then fight. I was left to fight the last phase of this boss on double health on my own. It helped the fact that I still had like 12 health potions, because I hadn't used any in the fight, and I did actually manage to beat him. So I was very pleased with that, and it felt like such a brilliant experience that I didn't feel shortchanged by the fact that I'd beaten him with with the help of a co-op. It was just like that was a fantastic event. It was brilliant, and I wouldn't have got that if I'd just played on my own and got really annoyed and really frustrated, and ended up getting good and beating it. So it was fantastic. It took me about 35 hours to beat the full Shadow of the Erdtree expansion.
Big boy.
I know, it's as big as any of the Dark Souls games on their own,
Yeah.
It saw me take on all of the main story, the final boss, the optional side quests and bosses. I hoovered up most of the leveling up items. I'm still shy a few of them. I wouldn't say that it makes Elden Ring an overall better game, which is difficult to do with a perfect game. But it does add a wonderful amount of new content that deserves its place in the game. It fits brilliantly. It offers up some extraordinary gameplay, some of the best world design, creature design, and aesthetics you'll ever see. It's stupid. It's too good. It's unnecessarily good. Like, it doesn't need to be as brilliant as it is to be the best. It's showing off. It's dreadful. It's incredible. I love it. I love you.